The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday morning show. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Cranack.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it. Weekend editions back with you here on Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Mark Cranack is on assignment. It is state baseball time for many, and his little guy is off and rolling. Some rain through the area yesterday delayed my kids' team a couple of hours. We made do, and Cranack can no doubt has the pine tar and eye black ready to go. Not as punishment per se, but just in case. Hope you're doing all right on a Saturday morning. You can find us and watch the show on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel or the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed. Ways to jump on there, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel, the StreamYard setup, get you ability to say hey in the chat section. Can tweet at us at HVarsity Radio, and then on Facebook with KFOR and also KFOR Sports Twitter. So Brandon Vogel with us in about 10 minutes, and around 8:25 or so, the Iron Horse Gary Sharp will be with us. So Elijah, interesting week in the world of college football. We're 6 weeks away with college football kicking off. We're less than 2 weeks from Big Ten Media Days. Things got eased into by the Big 12 as they had their media sessions this week, SEC next week, Big Ten, and then somewhere the ACC will probably sneak in as well. Don't know the exact order, but we're geared up to find our way off to Indy at Lucas Oil Field for I don't know how many years in a row we've done this, but we're excited to be able to do it. So on our mind this week, not only Nebraska recruiting, but also some key positions for the Big Red. I mean, there's question marks, of course, in a year one and with a new regime, but I think there's also kind of that quiet simmer, and this happens every offseason, doesn't it? You conclude spring as a fan base, and you've got some good, bad, and ugly you're going to go through. You go through the worst-case scenario, you talk about the best-case scenario, and then somewhere in the middle is, all right, what this season can actually be. And I don't know where you're at as a fan when it comes to what you've talked yourself into from an expectation standpoint, but you'll know more, gauge more likely after Big Ten Media Days, because you'll get to hear from Matt Rhule. You'll get to hear from Sims. You'll get to hear from Reimer. You'll get to hear from Piper. And, yes, you'll get to hear from all the other key points of different programs. And you look at Nebraska for this season, a lot of intrigue, but a lot of unknown, Elijah.
Yeah, you nailed it, and I think it's funny how we're a couple minutes late for just the E-True Hollywood story. We're a couple minutes late hopping on the air, and it's no time for small talk. We're diving right into Husker football. We're diving straight into business. So if you enjoy the Saturday morning show, we're boiling it down essentially for you here. We're getting right into it. But one of the things that I think is interesting, maybe something that we'll dive into over the next 2 weeks as we get ready for Big Ten Media Day, Schmitty, is the selections that Matt Rhule made among the players that he's going to be sending to Big Ten Media Days. And this didn't stand out to me right whenever these names were announced, because none of the names are surprising. Yeah, you're sending your starting quarterback. You're sending a linebacker who's been doing it for years. I mean, a guy that feels like he started the past 24 games at linebacker for Nebraska, if not more. And that might not be 100% accurate, but that's what it feels like. Luke Reimer's been a mainstay of that defense. And you have Ethan Piper, a guy who's a Nebraska kid, apparently has been somebody who's really been a face for what this culture shift has been as well. That's been something we talked about earlier this week with Brandon Vogel. And Ethan Piper's another guy that seemingly has transformed his body and has become a piece of that offensive line. And by sending him to Big Ten Media Days, you assume that they have a plan for him this upcoming season. But none of those guys, many of you throw Jeff Sims in there as well, none of those guys are guys that strike you as talkers. Are they, Schmitty? Like Ethan Piper, whenever he hops up in front of the media, yeah, he's charismatic, but he's not a talker. He's not a guy who goes up there and you're like, wow, would you hear what Ethan Piper had to say today? Or Luke Reimer, he's a guy you hear him in postgame where, he doesn't say anything all that spectacular. He knows ball, but he's not a guy that's made headlines with what he said in his postgame pressers or his pressers throughout the week. And Jeff Sims, I think we've heard from him once throughout.
We don't know.
Spring.
We don't know about Sims.
We don't know all that much about him, but still, also not a guy you would think, because we heard from MJ Sherman. MJ Sherman's the guy, he knows how to meet with the media. He knows how to talk. He made some headlines during his spring media appearances. Jeff Sims wasn't in that same boat. Whenever I think of the three names, it doesn't strike me as a Nebraska contingent that's going to be going up to Indy and making headlines of what they have to say behind the podium, what they have to say with their interviews. They strike me as three guys that just want to play ball. It's as simple as that. They're not up at Indy to have the reporters asking them all these questions and to make headlines and be the face of the Big Ten. Those are three guys that want to play ball, at least my humble reading. Maybe I'll be wrong when Big Ten Media Days go around, but I don't think that's unintentional from Matt Rhule. That the three guys that he picked are guys, they might not give you the best answer behind a podium, the longest answer that is. They'll answer your question, but they're guys that care about football beyond all else. And I think, or at least I wonder, maybe we'll get into this with Brandon and Gary, if that's intentional from Matt Rhule, just putting up guys in front of the podium at Big Ten Media Days that at the end of the day, they love football, and that's going to shine through their media assignments.
The word that comes to mind about the two of the three we've had a chance to interview a few times over the years, is substance, right? You're going to get substance from Matt Rhule. You're going to get substance from Luke Reimer. You're going to get substance from Ethan Piper. I absolutely would bet money that you're going to get substance from Sims because of just his journey. And listen, he is trying to turn the corner himself from a quarterback that has all sorts of talent and can be a big time game changer, difference maker. But he's got a new zip code. And he's got a new squad. And for the first time in his career, he may do a couple of things. One, have a lot of talent to use around him. I mean, it was kind of a one-man band for Sims, and that's not a knock on Georgia Tech. They didn't have it put together. If you look at their record, like the last three seasons, it indicates that. Similar to the Adrian years in Lincoln, where there was a lot of wow, but the end result wasn't what anybody wanted, including the quarterback. And then you look at the two kids that have been through about everything you can imagine in Lincoln with, almost and not enough, and the walk-on part versus the scholarship part. And that's an interesting dynamic, too, because Reimer's got a new linebackers coach. Mm-hmm. Reimer's a guy that could be playing up at one of the schools in South Dakota till a last-minute flip. He's awesome, and we both had a chance to watch him do some really fun things at Lincoln North Star, and he has transitioned to college to be an absolute difference maker, and he has endured some injuries. But when he's right and when he's healthy and when he's getting help from the defensive line to keep those big guys off of him, Reimer is an absolute missile at linebacker. You flip it over to Piper. Piper's a guy that's remade his body this offseason as a testament to the buy-in. And he's also one of the guys that's excited about Raiola coming back. And, Piper's an in-state scholarship kid on the offensive line. I mean, that's the story you want to hear about, the in-state offensive line scholarship kid that breaks through and has a really good last couple of years in Lincoln. So each story's got their own fascination. And above all, the substance part is Rhule saying, look, I don't want loud teams. And I'm paraphrasing, okay? But he just wants this squad to work to get better, worry about the day that is, worry about what's in front of you. As he likes to say, earn the right. Well, these three have earned the right in each of their own ways. As a guy who's remade his body in Piper, as a tackling machine at the linebacker spot in Reimer. And then from a Sims standpoint, he's a guy that showed out well in spring to grab the reins of that quarterback job. Let's welcome in Brandon Vogel with us from HailVarsity.com and magazine managing editor, as Vogues is in his football office. Vogues, thanks for spending some time with us this morning. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. How are you guys?
Good. We're just spitballing here about the three Huskers that are headed to Indy, the intentionality of it, and really just kind of the mindset of Rhule here. And the word that's in my vocabulary right now is substance or substantive with the three representatives for Nebraska. They each have their own unique story. One's a portal guy, and that's going to be nothing new in the world of college football. And then two in-state kids that have their own story to tell. Reimer's knocking on that door here for a third straight season. I know he was below 100 tackles last year, but that's just because he missed 2 games. He was a tackling machine 2 seasons ago. There's Piper, who's flipped his body, and the one spot on the offensive line it feels like you have an abundance of is guard. But he's a guy that really, coming from the community he came from, he's known about the lore of the Nebraska offensive line for a long time. He grew up with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting group when you kind of sit and break it down. I mean, I think Luke Reimer, based on his on-field production, based on his story to get to the point where he's been basically a 2-year starter and, as a walk-on, played right away as a true freshman. It's kind of as classic as you can get. I mean, it's you look at, if you play the fantasy game in the summer, because things do get pretty slow here in a little bit of early July. It's like, I wonder who Nebraska will send. Luke Reimer's probably the number one pick just based on, he's one of your best players. He's clearly does things the right way. And he's a team leader. So that one's simple enough. Jeff Sims is intriguing as you mentioned, a transfer, but it also feels pretty intentional of like, this guy's going to be the quarterback. This is the starting quarterback. And you're going to go and find out what he has to say from a Nebraska perspective. That'll be the longest, I think, that local media has had access to Jeff Sims, which will be good. And as a guy who, I haven't gone back and watched any like post-game Georgia Tech press conferences yet, but somebody who has a 3-year starter has plenty of experience with the media. That's the other thing is you're looking for leaders, but you're also looking for people who are comfortable in front of the microphones, who you have every confidence in kind of them being able to handle all sorts of questions, not just easy and tough ones, but also the weird and wacky ones that you're bound to get at Big Ten Media Days. And then Ethan Piper, another local guy. We don't hear a ton from him, but he was one of those players who stood out as Nebraska had tough losses. Felt like over the last 2 years, almost all of them were tough. He was often a guy that would be up there and would be taking things and try to talk about things, thoughtfully, not just emotionally. I always thought he struck a good balance there. So it's further proof, I think, that this coaching staff, particularly Coach Rhule, is really high on him and what he means, not just what he means for the team, but also I think his ability. In our Q&A with Matt Rhule in the yearbook, it kind of started out with, actually it was Aaron Sorensen's story on the O-line of Matt Rhule just being kind of blown away when they had one of their team dunk contests, and here's Ethan Piper throwing down. So he's impressed in his time with these new coaches. I think that much is evident.
And Brandon, is it fair to say that the read you get off these 3 guys, this is kind of how I led off this topic of conversation, is they're guys that care a hell of a lot more about playing ball than they do about talking. And I feel like there were options that Nebraska had on this roster of guys that could have been really media savvy, guys that could have gotten up in front of the mics and been guys that made headlines with what they had to say. Because like I think back to MJ Sherman's first press conference as a guy that, he was damn comfortable in front of the mics and Nebraska media. I shouldn't say fell in love with him, but was impressed with what he had to say, his maturity. And he's not a guy that Nebraska's sending off to Big Ten media days. Matt Rhule, it feels like probably intentionally is sending guys that, yeah, they're going to be comfortable in front of the mics, but they're guys that just want to go out there and play football.
Yeah, I think that's a good and important distinction. These aren't the three best. Matt Rhule did not choose the three best sound bites on the team. And it doesn't mean that these guys are not good at it, but that just wasn't the criteria, I think, is what you're kind of underscoring there, Elijah. And, and I know that's definitely the case, the way you put it, guys that like to play football more than they like to talk about playing football. I certainly know that's the case for Piper and Reimer. I honestly just haven't, consumed enough of Jeff Sims' interviews to know, but I think the fact that he's here indicates pretty strongly that that's the case. And this, continues, I think, what all of this sort of 2023 offseason, so January on, with this coaching staff has been. It's very intentional. And it seems to me like very clear. Like if you're somebody who maybe you're on the team, maybe you're an upperclassman, maybe you're a really good player, like, man, I thought I had a shot at Big Ten Media Days. Like, I don't think there's much confusion about why these guys get selected. It goes to the tweets that we see, the 10, and then it becomes the 10%. And now we're drastically over 10%, but, it's a figurative 10%. It becomes very clear of like, hey, here's what you do to get into this top group, the most trusted group. And Rhule's talked a lot about how important he thinks that is when you're constructing a team.
Brandon Vogel's with us. It's Hail Varsity Weekend Edition. At Brandon L. Vogel on Twitter is where you can follow him. I look at that 10% you just touched on, and it's reminiscent of yesteryear with when we talk to some of the former coaches and they point out that, well, hey, we had leaders at every position. That's nice to hear, but it was a reality. And it's true where you look at the position groups, they all had a representative, but there was also somebody in that room that had gone through the air quote wars of two-a-days and then they ascended to starting position. They were respected. They were the ones calling the shots, and there was great communication in the locker room and a standard of expectation. And this just feels like from a setup that Nebraska's kind of going back to maybe what worked, not only from a speed emphasis on defense, Vogues, but just the little things like, all right, 10 guys on the team that everyone respects, follows, and they'll have a voice to the rest of the team that the coaches trust. So that's important. Vogues, I want to talk quarterbacks with Sims and zoom out a minute just because of interesting story this week from Andy Staples on, guys that are impact folks in college football this year in the portal at the quarterback position. And I want to get your gauge because you've done a number of the previews in the Hail Varsity yearbook. Mordecai at Wisconsin, McNamara we've seen from Michigan, now at Iowa. Hartman goes to Notre Dame after just being incredible at Wake Forest. And then there's Sims in that group. Sims is one of these guys that's pegged to be a big-time difference maker. What's your take on Mordecai? Because Wisconsin's kind of a pick right now, and I get that. 18 starters back. Mordecai's in from SMU, and it's just all sorts of new for Luke Fickell with who his offensive coordinator is, and you tag. That's what's been missing at Wisconsin has been that difference maker at quarterback. They've had a manager, but it's been a far cry from that Russell Wilson era, that 1 year that really kind of made Wisconsin different and special on offense.
Yeah, he's interesting. So Tanner Mordecai, obviously a kind of a blue chip prospect coming out of high school, a guy who would sign with Oklahoma at a time when Lincoln Riley was there, So
that's what they have in the quarterback room.
Yes. So that's a pretty high standard right there just to be the pick for Oklahoma at a point. At SMU, I think he found an offense where that was tailored to clearly this is our best player and we're going to let him throw it as much as he wants. I mean, the numbers, his passing numbers are insane in his past 2 years at SMU. And that makes sense. You know, he was the guy. He was probably the Mustangs' best chance to win on a lot of Saturdays, at least offensively. And he did the job. Now he goes to Wisconsin, where we look at Phil Longo and what he's done with some pretty good quarterbacks at North Carolina in his recent history. And you say, well, maybe he'll just continue to throw the ball around and be Tanner Mordecai. I don't think that's what they're going to ask him to do. So the key piece of this becomes, all right, you're almost certainly not going to throw as many touchdowns as you did in either of your seasons at SMU. But you have the advantage that you probably haven't had a whole lot. I guess maybe those Oklahoma teams did, although he wasn't playing much. But you can turn around and hand the ball off to Braylon Allen. You've got a really, really good running back there who can, help you, is a real threat, which makes any play action you do more dangerous because you have to take a back like Allen seriously. So if Mordecai is content to focus on, hey, here's how this type of offense can really help me, and it's a little bit different than maybe what I was asked to do at SMU, I think he has a really high ceiling, and I think Wisconsin then has a pretty high ceiling in 2023. If there's a little bit of, I'm used to being in the shotgun, and maybe Wisconsin now will be almost full-time shotgun team too. Who knows? But used to being in the shotgun, making quick choices and getting the ball out. Big Ten's a different beast in terms of the defenses you'll face. So I think he's old enough, mature enough, and talented enough that he'll navigate. And his coaching staff is good enough at Wisconsin too, to be able to navigate that piece of it. But there are just some kind of turning points, I think, inherent in what they're trying to do in Madison.
Brandon, whenever you look at the grander Big Ten, not just the Big Ten West, the Big Ten as a whole, who do you think should feel the best about their quarterback situation heading into 2023?
Michigan, followed by maybe Maryland. I mean, those are the returning guys. There's a handful of others. Minnesota returns basically a part-time starter, which is pretty interesting. That's one to watch. If he kind of progresses, I think, from what we saw of him in limited duty last season, Minnesota has the chance to be pretty good. Like, one of the big wild cards, I think, in the conference is Hudson Card at Purdue. Another sort of similar to Mordecai, blue chip guy, good enough to be the quarterback at Texas. We can think back to Casey Thompson's last year there. That was like the big offseason announcement was Hudson Card's our guy. This is the future. This is where we're going. And, within, I think, 3 or 4 games, Casey Thompson eventually became the option in that first Steve Sarkisian season, which isn't necessarily a knock against Hudson Card. I mean, I think when you look at Purdue, they got one of the better transfer portal pickups in him. And I think it increases, they lose a lot of talent offensively, but it raised their ceiling, in my mind at least, a little bit, just by virtue of who they were able to get in the transfer portal at quarterback.
McNamara in Iowa. Do you have any earthly idea how that will go, considering the edict that is for the offensive output with little Brian having to call the shots and getting to continue to call the shots? But, I mean, Iowa, they lost a lot, but they still have a lot defensively. They're really, really good. They were elite level defensively last year. They have that expectation this year. And now they have a proven quarterback, offensive line that's been together now going on 3 years, a stud at running back, a tight end that came with McNamara. I mean, could this be an Iowa team, dare I say, that can put up 28 points and hold teams to 7? I mean, that's the math I come out with based on best case scenario. I'm going to get booed in the old StreamYard here, but I think they have the what I see on paper, Vogues, should be a hell of a good year for Iowa.
Yeah, no, I laughed because I kind of hoped you were going to say, is this an Iowa team that can average 40 points a game?
No, I wasn't going to go there, but I was going to go 4 touchdowns.
knowing that it would be a little bit of a joke, but it was even better. It's like, is this an Iowa offense that can average 28 points a game, which is like dead average in college football, but realistically where they've been the past 2 years, well, I mean, what's the contractually mandated expectation? 25, something like that. Yeah. So 28, if Iowa can score 28 points a game, they're probably not going to hold teams to 7. Like they do have to replace some real playmakers defensively, but that's never been an issue for that program. I would say hold teams to 12, 13, 14 would be a pretty good year. But let's assume that if you're averaging 28 and only giving up 14, well, you're 14 points better than your average opponent. And if you have a point differential like that, you're going to win a lot of games. As for McNamara, I think the floor for him it's just fine. I think the ceiling, because I do think he's better than what Iowa's had recently at quarterback. I think the ceiling is pretty to very good. Iowa has what I believe is, they have a young running back who put up, I don't know if it was the most yards for a freshman running back, but he was in contention for most yards by a freshman running back in program history. That helps a lot. They have yet another really good tight end. The question is, wide receiver. I think they lost via the transfer portal 2 of their best. Keegan Johnson, a name familiar to Nebraska fans, being one of them. So there's that piece of it. But, Iowa is always trying to, if Iowa's in a game where it has to throw the ball around the yard and ask its wide receivers to just win one-on-one a bunch, it's probably not in the type of game it wants to be in anyway. So there's a pretty clear path here for Iowa to be good on both sides of the ball. And offensively, I think you upgraded at quarterback. You've got a really good running back who has a year of seasoning now, and hey, you've got the tight end that you always want to have.
It's Brandon Vogel with us, Hail Varsity Radio Weekend Edition. So those are the 2 elephants in the West still. That's Wisconsin, and they look loaded. We'll see what the transition does to them, and it could be really, really good. They could actually get over the hump with a guy like Fickle. You have Iowa that they landed a lot of infusion on offense. Vogue's going to go here to the StreamYard with a question, and Elijah also going to have you weigh in. I'll chime in as well, but big thanks to Hurrdat for checking in. And we will get to more of your StreamYard inputs as well. But with the talent on this team, let's apply it back to Nebraska, as we talked about talent on some of the other teams in the West. If we have a typical Matt Rhule year 1, will that sound any alarm bells? And I think we all think, guys, that there's talent on this team, but the reality is there is transition. There's new offense, there's new defense, there's new personalities. I don't worry about Rhule and his coaches connecting with guys on this football team that may have liked their old position coach or their old head coach. I mean, Rhule's gone out of his way to really build some relationships and be sincere about it. I think there's enough talent to get to a bowl game. I think we've said that for a lot of the last few years. Just because the last few years have hurt for Nebraska fans doesn't discount the fact that there was enough talent there to get bowling. All right, I'm not saying get to an Orange Bowl back in the day or even win the West, but there's been enough talent to get bowling, and they fell short of expectations. How do you decipher that question? What do you think, Bogues? I'll start with you. When you talk about the talent part of this equation and then the typical year 1s.
Yeah, a really fascinating question, and one I was actually thinking about just yesterday. And I was trying to think in 2018. So Scott Frost, he's the guy. Like, enthusiasm for a coaching hire, I don't think can be any higher among the fan base than it was in, say, August of 2018. And, I'll be interested in your guys' thoughts on this. I was kind of going through game by game, and like, we know Nebraska started 0-6 that season. Was there a moment where that season felt lost? And I kind of went through game by game. So like, all right, you lose the first game. Or it's the first game, you have the injury. Adrian Martinez. A lot of that was centered on, oh, look how good the quarterback was in his first start. Then you have the Troy loss, but that's with the backup. You get smoked by Michigan. It was tough Michigan team that year. You're on the road. You're not ready yet. I couldn't come up with a point in 2018 where things really felt like it's like, well, it's time to check out of this first season as a fan, because it's just not going to get there. And particularly because Nebraska then finished 4-2. I think that's the case. I think that's generally the case for most year ones. Now, if Nebraska goes 2-10, which I do not think they will do, but for the sake of the question, it was a hypothetical, and we'll entertain it, of course. If Nebraska does do that, I think you have kind of your year one exception no matter what, but also because it was very clearly what has happened to a Matt Rhule program twice now. That helps dull it a little bit. But the thing that I guess I'm trying to get at here is, as Nebraska has had a series of seasons that have not gone to expectation, I do think the patience meter gets a little shorter each time. Not that people are looking for any reason not to check out of a football season, but as the losses mount, if it took, okay, you're not bowl eligible anymore, say 7-8 years ago, to now it's like, well, you're not going to win more than 4 games. I think it just gets a little bit shorter each time. So I do think will it ring alarm bells? Certainly some. But maybe not quite as many as it would if we didn't know that this is the way things have gone twice now for Matt Rhule.
And I think it's important here to define what alarm bells means, because if it's 2-10, as you say, Brandon, I think it kind of depends what the on-field product looks like. But I don't think the alarm bells would lead me to say Matt Rhule doesn't know what he's doing here. The alarm bells could be, man, this rebuild's going to be longer than I thought. Man, there's going to be a much-needed talent influx that needs to happen before Nebraska gets back on top. But I don't think the alarm bells would be, man, it's over for Matt Rhule, because we have Rick chiming in here. Like, think about the expectations for the team this year. He says this year's team will be more disciplined. And if this year's team isn't more disciplined, I don't think you first look at Matt Rhule as a guy that, you know what, he doesn't have it around here. You look at the players on the field and say, okay, Matt Rhule, he needs to get some different talent on the field. He needs to develop some guys and bring his guys up into a place where they're in the starting 11. Or you have an offensive line that looks sloppy next season. I don't think you look at that as a Donovan Raiola and Matt Rhule problem. I think you look at it as these next offensive linemen they got coming up, Gunnar Gatula and the guys in this recruiting class 2023 and 2024, those guys need to start seeing the field, and that's going to improve the offensive line play. I think if you define alarm bells as, man, Matt Rhule might not be long for Nebraska, I don't think much that happens in year one is going to lead to that. But in terms of how long is this rebuild going to take, that's where I think the alarm bells could go off.
Well, and we have Gray Woman 79 chiming in. Her alarm bells would be if we don't win a single game. That would be 7 alarm, I believe. Thank you for the input. No, Gary, who was it in the stream? We got a lot of Rick, let me give Rick the credit. And you put that comment up there, Elijah. Yeah. If they're not more disciplined, that's what's cost Nebraska the last 5 years, has been discipline, has been football IQ. It's not been an effort thing. Most of the time, it's been discipline. I think 2-10. We're getting into that murky water of 2-10. Dear God, but what's it look like? I mean, are you destroyed by injuries? Did you absolutely misevaluate on some of the portal guys? Can they not handle transition to the Big Ten? Those are some of the reasons to me as how you get to 2-10. You just have the mother of all 1999 season tributes where you fumble it 50 times. Do you have the offenses that just line up against 3-3-5 and get downhill to the tune of 400 yards a game? I mean, those are catastrophic reasons as how you get to 2-10, I think, compared to you're going to have some tight ball games. You just got to be over 500 or at 500 in these one-score games, and you're there. And the teams you're more talented than Bogues and Elijah, win the ball game by 7, 10, 14, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think, to get to 2-10, like I come into this season, I'm very confident that whatever the record is, I'm expecting at the end of the year to feel, and I'm thinking that this would probably be the majority opinion of like, whatever the record is, people will look at that and be like, that was better football based on what I've seen from the staff. And that's a, assumption on my part, but an informed assumption. If that's the case, I would have a hard time seeing it fall as low as, say, 2 or even 3 wins. It would take some combination of like injuries, some unfortunate turnover luck. I think there's also, even though Matt Rhule played at Penn State, it's worth noting at least and stopping for a second and saying, there's a transition period and it can be lengthy to moving into the Big Ten, which for many of these coaches, this will be some of their first times in the league. That can be difficult. And, I think the most recent comment that we put on the screen at least noted this, the spring game was not clean. It was very not clean from a fumbles perspective. And, if we're talking about hypothetical, like how does this get to a point where, because people are very excited, they're excited for every football season, but there's just nothing that quite compares to a new staff. Anything seems possible before they've played a game, right? Something like that, if you just couldn't clean up that piece of it, and, those things are what it would take, I think, for this season to get to a point where at the end of it, we're like, well, didn't really see much positive momentum from that. So I guess hopefully that's coming in year 2.
To me, it's about self-infliction and just depleted ability is how you start a era like you have similarly, and you're at a different starting point, presumably, than a Temple and then a Baylor compared to where you're at Nebraska.
And Schmidt, can I just throw in really fast? You said depleted ability. That sounds like a hell of a band name. Is that just me?
It's my dodgeball team name.
That's like an early 2000s like pop punk band. Depleted ability.
Could be pop punk. It could also be like a super group of artists who are all in other famous bands, and it's like, think the Highwaymen. Like if the Highwaymen, a bunch of country superstars who are now entering or firmly in middle age, like they could call themselves Depleted Ability as a joke. I think that works.
Vogues and Gary Sharp joins us. When we talk about the Highwaymen, let's go down the list here because Farm Aid's around the corner. So you had Roy, you had Waylon, you had Willie, you had
Chris Christopherson.
Chris Christopherson, and then you had Johnny Cash. Was that the 5 Highwaymen?
It was 4. You had Waylon, Willie, Johnny, and Chris.
Okay. Well done. Sharpie, we're talking about, how this season gets away, maybe, and it goes back to a StreamYard question, or if the season gets away and they put it back up here. We asked and talked about the talent on this team. What if we have a typical Matt Rhule year 1? Should that sound any alarm bells? And Bogues has chimed in. I've had a thought. Elijah's had a great take. What's your word on this? I just don't. God, I know it's optimism July, but I just don't see him going anything super far down single digit wise. I just think they find a way to get hovering around that bowl number.
So I would be very disappointed if it was a typical year fair. 1. And I think Matt Rhule would be extremely disappointed. He has said to, and I've said this on this show a couple of times, he has kind of intimated to a lot of people that they are ahead of where they were at Temple and Baylor. They have more resources. They have more talent to work with and find places for than they've had in their previous 2 stops. He thinks that they're a year ahead, and he's kind of told the guys this year, the older guys on this roster, hey, hang with us. There's going to be some bumps in the road this year. This is not This is not going to be easy as we all kind of navigate and get to know each other and we go through the ups and downs of a 12-game season. But stick with us because the following year, we really feel we're going to get you guys to a really, really good bowl game. Now, not saying they're not intent on going to a bowl game this year, but he's saying, hey, a really, really good bowl game next year. So I think Matt Rhule personally would be very disappointed if they had a 2-win or a 3-win season. I just don't see it. I think if you're a first-year head coach, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, about breaking down a schedule, this is a really ideal schedule for a first-year staff with no real Big Ten experience to try and navigate the waters. I don't think you could have asked for a better schedule than Nebraska's got to try and figure out how to get to 6 at least to get to a bowl game.
Well, I will add, I think the one thing you could change about the schedule is you put Minnesota in November and have an easier first game. But aside from that, I agree with your point, Gary.
No, Elijah, I'm going to disagree.
Really?
I think the way I look at schedules is, because people want to say, well, Nebraska's got an average schedule. They go, oh, boy, look till 24 and 25. I think the schedule should be looked at when you play a particular team. It actually could benefit Nebraska greatly that they get Minnesota and Colorado in September, and they're not playing Minnesota in that usual spot at the end of October, early November, or even Colorado a little bit later when Colorado has a chance to, take the name tags off the jerseys and go, okay, oh, you're Bob, you're Shadir. And also keep in mind this, guys, is Nebraska gets one shot with Tony White to do something that is not on film. And I think that is 47 days from now. So I think the schedule of where you play those games is good. The only part of the schedule that I'm like, is when you go Michigan short week on the road at Illinois.
Yeah, that sucks. That's rough because of the timing. Both teams back to back. That's not a good stack, but it'll absolutely test you. And I agree with you, Sharpie. I'd rather get Minnesota early because they get better. And even if they're depleted injury-wise, they still have shown the ability to handle Nebraska in November, whether it's with 30 kids out with COVID or not. They find a way. They are built for depth. To your point on Colorado, once they get familiar, if they can stick together, they could have a better end of the season. So we touched on schedule there. I think the schedule is doable. The crossovers aren't as brutal as they've been in the past. I mean, but listen, you at least get Michigan at home. You get Maryland at home, which is big. And Sparty is not going to be fun or easy, but they're doable.
Yeah, I got a question, and this is something that I think Brandon and I have talked about. I was looking back through the history of Matt Rhule at Temple and Baylor. His teams usually are pretty good on the road. They may not win every game, but they're usually very competitive on the road regardless of opponent. Do you guys think there's any reason why? Because that's been a problem. That's been a problem with Nebraska for a while. Is first of all, they haven't been able to defend their home field, but they haven't been able to play well at all on the road, and things get sideways pretty quick.
I think just from a motivation and communication standpoint, I think he stresses the importance of what good teams do, and that's win on the road. They pack their defense, their special teams. They don't fumble the football. Elijah, you tweeted last night from Phil Steele, just from the entertainment-only purposes here of what Rhule is from a gambling standpoint on the road with his teams.
28-12 against the spread in 40 true road games as a college head coach. Know it off the top of my head. And I'm not going to say Matt Rhule's a gambling man, but Matt Rhule, knowing you can go down to the Warhorse and bet on the away games, he's going to take care of you.
18-8. 18-8 is an underdog.
People are writing that down. They're like, okay, I see what that Minnesota line is. But Brandon, don't you think maybe the style that he has allows you to not let a game get away from you and control on the road in an environment you can't entirely control? You can have game control.
Yeah, you can. And I think that's a key part of, their entire approach. I think back to Michigan State 2 years ago where, they're on their way to 11-2, and Mel Tucker's thing was, what he was telling his guys is we got to drag these teams into deep water. Like, just keep, stay in the game, like keep just kind of tugging a little bit. and we've heard it with Rhule in slightly a different format, but I think it's similar, talking about how much they're going to win games in the fourth quarter. And, one of the big yearbook pieces I did early on in the Scott Frost era was just how important it was for that UCF team that went undefeated to have a lead. And this is kind of the reverse approach, I think, which is well suited to the Big Ten, maybe required in the Big Ten, unless you're in Ohio State, unless you're where Michigan is at right now. But even Penn State, which has been a really, really good team, just not better than either of those two, even they're subject to a little bit of that. They've got a lot of talent, but it's just hard if you've got these teams that are really resolute of like, that's fine. We're just going to do our best to get this to the fourth quarter, and we'll see what happens.
That ability to just hang around, right? To your point, Sharpie, and what you said, Vogel, Elijah, can you hang around long enough to have the other team make a mistake? Can you capitalize on it, or can you hang around long enough to have a game-shifting play, make a play, make something happen in the fourth quarter? And I think that approach is super important and should be pretty good.
Well, one quick point on that.
Huh?
You remember you would hear Coach Osborne always talk about, okay, if we don't allow him to return the ball out to the 20, we've got a chance to get it back on, like at the 45-yard line when we hold them 3 and out. Coach Osborne always talked about the field position game. Like he had it down to a science that if we're able to return a kick to blank, or we're able to, even if a drive doesn't end up in the end zone, if we're able to punt it and pin him inside of the 10, this is where we're going to get the ball back. Rhule kind of strikes me as the guy that's ready to play that field position game. And as to add to Brandon's point, is keep it close when you get to the fourth quarter, and then a break here or there, or your will allows you to win. But I think that's why, as we get closer to the season, we're going to probably start to have to talk more about the importance of a Buschini, and then the very, very importance of, I think once you travel inside of the 30, with this team this year, you got to put at least 3 up. I mean, Bleak Road, Alvano, I think their status will become even more important as we start to figure out what this team wants to do.
No, that's key, right? I mean, that is you see it every graphic, every game, and we're all college football consumers. We're watching either in person or on our flat screens, where you see the green yard line, field goal range. You got to come away with points, and you nailed it. That's been an issue. I mean, Nebraska has left a lot of points, to sound like a coach, on the field. They have too many empty possessions and too many tight ball games. Vogues, what are you working on here, bud? What's coming up from you with Hail Varsity? I know everyone's packing up for Indy.
Yeah, getting the August issue ready too. I'm starting to really dive into that. And now Elijah brought up against spread numbers. I'm going to have to revisit that. It has nothing to do with financial windfalls or losses potentially, but it's one of the first things I look at, with coaches, because it basically makes every game 50-50. And back when we created a long list of like, hey, here's some people who might be on Nebraska's list or maybe should be, Matt Rhule had, I think, maybe the best against the spread record, like winning over 60% of those games, which tells you, in my mind, that good coaches figure out ways to win football games. Yeah. And that number can be indicative of that.
Love it. Vogues sent you the screenshot of Elijah's tweet last night on the spread numbers, and you're going to get your accounting hat on, and we'll be ready to go for some wagering. Thanks for your time this morning, Vogues. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Right. Yep, there he is, Brandon Vogel in his football office. Sharpie, what's up, man? How's the week?
Good. Hey, let's finish this discussion on the gambling part, because as Elijah tweeted that out last night, so those are 42 road games as a college coach at Temple and Baylor, 28-12 against the spread, 10-4 as a favorite, 18-8 as an underdog. Now in conference games against the spread, Rhule is 43-20. So 70% he covers overall on road games, 68% he covers in the conference. That's a pretty good thing, because I think I think one thing, just to add to the conversation that I came in on that you were having with Brandon, is we're going to look for underdog wins. Nebraska's going to be in a handful of games this year where they're going to be an underdog. In my opinion, they're going to play 7 one-score games. And Rhule has had what is it? His last year at Temple, I believe, or his first year at Baylor, he had a really, in one-score games, he was successful. Whatever it is, there has been a year where Rhule was really, really good at one-score games. Is how many underdog wins straight up? So you win, you don't cover the spread and lose, but you win games when you're an underdog. How many of those games are we going to have this year? And then along the way of making a move and convincing people that this is headed in the right direction, is there a double-figure underdog win in the horizon for Nebraska?
Man, that's the big win. That's the proof of concept win. Okay, let's look at some of the. You're going to be double-digit dogged Michigan. Okay, fair.
Yep.
You're going to be double-digit dogged. Where else?
Depending on how the season goes, probably the next game that stands out in my mind as being a potential double-digit underdog would be that Wisconsin game if Wisconsin lives up to the expectations that a lot of people are placing on them.
And those would probably be the only 2 all year that you're double-figure underdogs in. But you're an underdog right out of the gate in Minneapolis.
Is that 8.5?
Yeah, and you'll stay, and I think you'll stay a favorite against Colorado, regardless of what happens week 1 with both CU at TCU and then Nebraska at Minnesota. And then you're going to be a favorite the next 2 weeks. Then you'll be that double-figure underdog against Michigan. The line against Illinois will be kind of interesting. And then you are maybe looking at a stretch where you're a slight, big favorite Northwestern, slight favorite Purdue. And then it's kind of a crapshoot when you get into November because we don't know where Maryland's going to be. And I wouldn't overlook Maryland. And then Michigan State, it's on the road. What kind of season are they having? And then you hit that back-to-back with Wisconsin or Iowa. But I think along the way for, just to say, hey, we're here, is you start to win games as an underdog. I look at South Carolina. South Carolina last year won some games as underdog, and they won, I think, Tennessee and South Carolina, or Tennessee and Clemson, they were double-figure underdogs. And they won those games. Yeah, so if you're Shane Beamer in Columbia and you're on the rubber pea and chicken circuit this offseason, you could use that as a selling point. Hey, guys, we're headed in the right direction. Games where we weren't favored, we won. Not covered, we won. And I think that's a selling point to the fans, and that's what I'm going to be kind of watching this year. But I think there's going to be 7 one-possession games that Nebraska is going to play in, and maybe this is the year, landing the plane on the conversation about, how many wins and all that kind of stuff. Maybe this is the first time everybody else seems to correct to the mean the following year when they have a bad year with one-score games. They turn around and have a great year the next year. Like TCU and Texas Tech last year were combined 10-1 in one-score games. Baylor, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State the year before were great in one-score games. Last year, they were all bad in one-score games. The only school in America that has not reverted back to the mean is Nebraska. Maybe this is the year.
Well, Gary, to that point, I think the reason why Nebraska hasn't reverted back to the mean is because it's not luck winning one-score games. It takes discipline. It takes teams that aren't going to turn the ball over, that aren't going to shoot themselves in the foot with penalties, and that's been Nebraska's one of their biggest problems. There's a multitude of problems, but the discipline, not only on offense, not only defensively, but also with the special teams. And I think that's why you look at the one-score losses and just the failures there, because it's not luck. It's not just about averages. Football isn't played with numbers. It's about what you do on the football field. Nebraska hasn't been a team that's been coached in a way that would lead them to have success in one-score games.
Absolutely. Great point.
Back to the word discipline, right, that we had early in the StreamYard. Sharpie, before we wrap up, I want to get your take on recruiting for Nebraska, how you're feeling with Nebraska's chances with Tamua. I know Preston's going to be making his announcement from Hawaii. Nebraska's in that race with Oregon. And you also have Bricks, and it feels like Nebraska and OU are in that race. K-State still in the picture as well. Don't really have a timeline on Bricks, but what is your thought here from a spot standpoint? You'd take both offensive linemen. You won an edge rusher. You lost out on the kid that picked Michigan this week. Is there an edge rusher out there that Nebraska likes enough to take? And then lastly, is there a wild card spot? Because there's still plenty of names out there that are in-state and, again, 500-mile radius. What do you think it kind of tops out at for recruiting?
I think, first of all, after that great month of June, Nebraska needs to replenish the talent. They need to build a depth of talent. And you've seen that. They've gotten some dudes. I mean, they've gotten some guys that I would put on they are bus-proof. Like Kawan Lacey, to me, is a bus-proof guy at running back because he's a 3-down running back. So they've done a good job of starting to stack the cupboard a little bit and follow their plan in recruiting. I think they're close to being done. You know, they're going to get a commitment tonight. We're all going to be up at midnight watching the Big Hawaiian. And my gosh, we love Finoti. We love the other Samoan lineman that came to Nebraska and then all of a sudden disappeared. 6'4", 317. And he's an interior offensive lineman. Hello. You know, and he looks really, really good. That would be a feather in the cap of Donovan Raiola, who I think is on a 1-year deal this year of a make it or break it season with the offensive line. But in terms of recruiting, that's a great pickup for him and a great pickup for Nebraska. Bricks is one who has played it close to the vest. There are some days, guys, where I say, man, I think Nebraska's got a good shot. And then Alabama is kind of hanging around. There's K-State. There's Oklahoma. You never know what's going to happen, but I still feel pretty good about Nebraska. And then after that, it's kind of does somebody fall into your lap? You know, the really only in-state guy that is out there that Nebraska would take is Caleb Benning. And, you know, Caleb, who has really handled his recruiting well, he hasn't let other people dictate his timeline. He's kind of taken his time, and he's going to go through his season. Knock on wood, he stays healthy. He's one of those kids that you probably watch numbers like in camps and go, whoa. But if you watch him play, you go, wow, this is a kid that knows how to play football, playing what he does for Omaha West Side. So I think he's going to go through the season. Maybe another offer comes his way. But that would be the last in-state guy that I think Nebraska would definitely be a take. But I don't think Caleb's going to make up his mind until after the season, and good for him. He's handled it the right way. He's not let anybody else, you know, say, hey, you got to do this. But other than that, I think Nebraska is kind of getting to the finish line of recruiting, and now you can start focusing on the 25s, which I think we'll see a lot of those during the season on campus instead of potential 24 prospects. Do
you like where Nebraska's at in their recruiting with the edge position? Do you like what they have? I think, the world wants edge guys, so it's everyone else's problem.
That's why Schmidt and Elijah, I think Christian Jones at Westside is a more important recruit than Carter Nelson. Now, if Christian Jones, who still got 2 years of high school left at Westside, he is in a state that we produce tight ends and we're starting to produce some skill guys. We don't really produce outside linebackers that can cover in space and can get to the passer. Christian Jones can do that. He is a bigger get for Nebraska than Carter Nelson. I'm not afraid to say that. I think not only in terms of the position of need, but in state, we got a lot of tight ends. We don't have a lot of Christian Jones that have been in the state. And people want to compare him to Nick Henrich. He is further ahead of where Nick was when Nick was going into his junior year at Burke. So that's always a position that it's going to be tough around here to get those kind of guys. Those might be portal guys. You know, you might have to disguise some weaknesses in the meantime before you're able to get guys that can go and rush the passer, because Randy Gregory fell into Nebraska's lap, and it's been tough to find Randy Gregory since then.
Gary, I have a quick thought after this, but I want to follow up on Christian Jones. You mentioned the comp to Henrich. I'm with you. I don't think that quite fits the bill. A guy I think of that was 500-mile radius Husker fans loved, JoJo Domann. Do you see the comparison there between Christian Jones and JoJo Domann?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good comp because they were both good in space and they're smart football players. I think Christian is going to blow up. And I think Nebraska's in a really, really good spot here. Family is important to him. Nebraska's recruited him the right way. And again, keep in mind, he's got 2 years of high school left. But I think anybody, you know, he might even be a tad bit ahead of JoJo. I think Christian's a national guy. He just happens to play in Omaha in a state which, what are you doing being an outside linebacker or a guy that can get to the quarterback? But he's got great speed. He's got great instinct. And he's a must for Nebraska in the class of 25. And Nebraska's in a good spot.
Gary Sharps with us here. It's a Saturday morning edition, Hail Varsity Radio. Should may not step on your toes here, but I want to ask Gary before we get him out here about just Matt Rhule's plan here with the class of 2024, do you think that he has a mind or just in the back of his mind, maybe a thought on the transfer portal after this season, depending on how the results goes? And I know there's unique rules in place for how many guys you can pick up as a first-year head coach in your first recruiting class, but do you think he's going to be looking ahead to that and what he can do in the transfer portal before he decides to fill out a class of 2024?
You know what? I don't think so. I think what Nebraska will do with the portal is it will not be part of a rebuild. It'll be a reinforce. I think they really, really want to recruit the high school, junior college kid, get them in and develop them and retain them. And then if they need to fill a hole here or there, but I think they're going to go heavy with their recruiting because they have a blueprint and they have a lot of confidence in that plan. And then if we need to fill a hole or two, we'll look to the portal. But I don't think Nebraska wants to rely on the portal, except for this past year. I don't think it'll be as heavy, but I think Nebraska would. It makes sense for a place like Nebraska, especially if they get the ball rolling, is you're going to be attracted to some guys that want a second chance or they want to move up, that it would be a destination for them. So I would say maybe 3 or 4 guys out of the portal instead of like the 8 to 9. And that's really with what that staff wants to do and getting guys in and developing them as their own. I think that's the way they want to go. And that's why we're excited to see, guys that are coming in 23, guys that are on the roster, to see how they develop and who takes that next step, and it may not be just, hey, develop, we're teaching you something different. It may be the Xavier Betts thing, and I know you guys talked about it earlier in the week on your afternoon show, is just investing in players. This staff does a great job of getting to know players outside of the number they're wearing on their jersey and how that changes guys. And I think Xavier Betts is that. So factor that into development as well, of guys just they feel like they're wanted and they feel like they matter. And all of a sudden the light clicks.
It sounds simple, doesn't it, Sharpie?
It does.
You give somebody some investment, you give them some care, you give them some love, you give them some direction, and they will absolutely go perform for you.
Well, I think it's all about, look at this. We're in our business. We all, we're not running the show. We have bosses. Don't we react differently if we feel like the person that is in charge is investing in us?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and
who do you want to go play for?
I tell you that the Xavier Betts interview with Jessica Cody on the network, that was pretty enlightening. Z-Man has been through it before. He doesn't have anything to prove to me. All right, it's proved to himself that there's no what if left. But he just talked about somebody just caring about him.
Sure.
Just saying, hey. How you doing? What's going on? What can I do for you? And what that does to any of us of any age, but in particular 18 to 22-year-old kids that are still trying to figure it out, whether they play football or whether they're just a student at a university.
Gary Sharp with us, weekend edition, the Iron Horse. Guys, fun. Blew by this morning. This was awesome.
Hey, 47 days away. What do you think?
Favorite
Elijah,
47?
Elijah, what will we be talking about 7 weeks from now? What will be the Saturday morning tone 2 days after Nebraska, Minnesota? Call your shot right here.
Did Schmidt overpay for Pearl Jam tickets?
That's a good one. I like that one. That's an easier route than I was going to go. That's a classic.
That could carry us for 2 hours.
But I think realistically, whenever I look at that Minnesota team, Gary, I like your point you made earlier that you might be getting Minnesota at the right time. I still think that Minnesota team, they've been under Fleck for years now. I think they're going to be farther ahead than Nebraska. I think, unfortunately, it's going to be one of those cases of what positives can you take from a close loss on a Thursday night against Minnesota. And we've talked about that plenty over the past couple years. I would not look forward to having another show, a reaction show, if you will, saying, man, what positives can we take from this loss yet again, guys? But I think it will feel different than the losses that we felt under Frost, because you look at game one under Frost every single year, it's felt like a team that was ill-prepared. It's felt like a team that was undisciplined. Go back through the record. Every single time Scott Frost in game one made some sort of crucial error, shot himself in the foot, Nebraska blows it week one, and we have a reaction show where we're asking what the hell just happened. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be that case with Matt Rhule against Minnesota in game one. I think it's going to be one of those losses that you can actually truly take some positives from, not just guys hopping on the radio saying, what can we take from this? I think there's going to be a mood among Husker Nation of, man, that looked different.
Yeah, well, Three of the last 4 football coaches in Nebraska have lost their first game. That's another wild stat in the laundry list of, the CBS length receipt list of wild stats about Nebraska football.
Man, Sharpie, have yourself a weekend. Appreciate you much, man.
Hey, as always, guys, I appreciate it. Fantastic show this week from you too.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Gary, appreciate
Gary
it.
Sharp. Yep. And that'll do it for the weekend edition.
I do have a fun comment to bring in here from Rick. Rick's been chiming in on the stream all day long, and he has a question for you, Schmitty. When you guys first started this show, were you called Hail Junior Varsity?
We were not. It's been Hail Varsity for, 12, 13 years probably.
I just thought that was a fun comment in from Rick. I like that one. I haven't thought about it that way.
No.
That's what they should call the new Hail Varsity Kids issue that you can get with your subscription to Hail Varsity magazine. If you got the yearbook this year, you also got a free inclusion to the Hail Varsity Kids edition. Maybe we should run this by Vogel. Instead of calling it the Hail Varsity Kids edition, we call it Hail Junior Varsity.
Or just, HJV.
HJV, yes. Love that.
I like it. Get the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, where you can get the audio, the video on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel, and give the radio Twitter a follow at HVarsity Radio, at Schmidt _radio, at Herbal Essence. Talk to you on Monday at 4 with Hail Varsity. Thanks.